I'm ready.
Hi, John. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Dr. Jones.
Dr. Lassiter, right. Thank you for reminding me.
Wait.
We do, but I want my listeners to know you and all your greatness. So please tell us about you, who you are, what you do for people who are not familiar with you and your work.
Okay, well, now I'm going to be a little narcissistic, right? So, not familiar. No, right. Very appropriate for the topic. Okay. But all joking aside, I'm Jonathan Matthias Lassiter, PhD. And my training, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist with specialized training in clinical health psychology and expertise in Black psychology as a discipline. I always make that distinction because you could be Black and you could be a psychologist and not do Black psychology. Black psychology is its own distinct discipline with its own distinct tenets and underpinnings. So, currently I'm an assistant professor at Muhlenberg College, where I teach undergraduate students, and I'm also visiting professor at UCSF through the visiting professor program, and I do HIV prevention research as part of a competitive grant out there over the summer. So it's a summer residency program. And outside of those professional titles, I'm just a Southern boy, living in Allentown, Pennsylvania, trying to, do good in the world.
And most importantly, too, you were a writer, too. So don't forget to add that, because you write a lot of scholarly articles and things like that on your expertise, right?
Yes, that is true. Thank you so much, Dr. Jones, for bringing that to the fore. Definitely. I've been very lucky to be able to have my work published in both academic journals as well as lay publications. I even had a few lay publications interview me and do some write-ups on my work. So I'm very blessed in that regard. My work centers particularly around religion and spirituality and how it can be both a risk and protective factor for Black, gay, bisexual, same gender loving men in particular, and Black communities as a whole. I have 2 papers now under review where I'm looking at both heterosexual and sexual minority Black people and religious coping. So, and I have an award-winning book called Black LGBT Health in the United States. My co-editor, Dr. Follins, and that's looking both at mental and physical health in Black LGBT Americans. So
amazing.
That's what I do. A lot.
That's amazing. That's great. There's only one of you. Is there a clone?
I don't know that person. If there's a clone, I do not know that person.
It's super amazing. And tell my listeners, what drives the passion beyond your work, John?
Well, I think it's kind of what you just said, right? That there is like, if I don't do this work, who is going to do this work? There aren't enough Black people, period, doing work around mental health. And no shade to other communities, but the Black community is where my heart is. When I think about where I want my impact to be, where I want my legacy to be, it would be great if everyone, regardless of race, sexual orientation, gender, could benefit from my work. But I am particularly focused on doing all that I can to make sure that people that look like me, who have similar experiences as me, their stories are told in the forums, like the journals and like the conferences, like the community centers, everywhere, in the churches, because often those stories are not told. And they're often not told by qualified, trained professionals.
Right.
And it's no shade to the lay people. However, there is value to having qualified, trained folks talk about mental health and mental health spaces. The personal narratives are important, but I think we need both the personal narratives and the trained expertise.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for pointing that out. And you're here today to talk about narcissism in the gay Black community.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so I'm totally excited to have that conversation, but I do want to say a little caveat in the sense that, of course, everything that we're going to talk about today, I don't want to overgeneralize.
Yeah.
There's exceptions to the rule. There is no one Black gay male community.
Absolutely.
There's no one way to be Black, no one way to be gay, no one way to be a Black gay male. And so I don't want people to take what I say today and be like, oh, this is what the Black gay man in my life is. So let's just, that's the scientist in me, right? Like, we not overgeneralize these results, right?
Absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, that's very true. But before we get into the specifics and the logistics, you've had your own personal experiences with narcissism in the community. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in narcissism. That's your area. The one I go to, everyone, when I have a question. So, I do have a working knowledge of it. And I was looking at some of the criterion in the DSM-5, and I was just like, oh, I've seen that. And it's interesting though, because I think a lot of what is the narcissism that I have experienced and I have perceived in the Black gay community, Black gay male community in particular, I think a lot of it stems out of that ego injury, in the sense that Black gay men's egos have been severely injured, starting from a very young age, and so they develop some of these symptoms as coping mechanisms, and then it becomes habit, and they don't really know how to engage outside of those.
Okay.
Because Black gay male, and of course this could extend to larger gay male communities, but we're keeping it on Black gay male communities. But Black gay male communities oftentimes, they're acting in response to something. They're preempting a threat. They're preempting an injury. And so they take on this narcissistic stance, or what we might call narcissism, as a protective mechanism, and it goes awry. So some of it can originally be adaptive, but then as with any particular behavior, it can be adaptive in some contexts and then maladaptive in others.
Absolutely.
And so that's the way that I conceptualize the narcissism that I see a lot in Black gay male communities.
Can you give an example? You were talking a lot about the injury.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the injuries that you are talking about, if you want to just lay it out for us?
Yeah, I will totally unpack that. So what I'm speaking of in particular are the injuries that Black gay men have to who they are, to just by a way of being. That is attacked. From a very young age, a lot of us are told that it is not okay for us to be who we are. And again, I'm sure there are other communities that can say amen to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
For Black gay men in particular, we have white supremacist society around us telling us that, being Black is pathological, right? Being Black is to be poor, to be a thug, a hood, sexually promiscuous, a threat, scary, dangerous, all of these. Then we have a lot of time family members. Not every single Black gay man grows up in a homophobic environment, but a significant number of Black gay men do experience homophobia and homonegativity in their homes in which they grow up. I know I personally that was my personal experience. The men who I've had as clients and as research participants have also endorsed similar experiences of having things as simple as your father telling you to act like a man. And so in that way, it's not only an attack of the sexual orientation. And at that point, people are usually, again, I said it happens at a young age, so it's early as 6, 2 years old for some people. They're getting this message that people are responding to a perceived sexual orientation, because at that age, children don't really have an idea of what sexual orientation is.
Absolutely.
It's more of just an innate internal feeling. But the adults in the environment are perceiving it in a certain way and storing it as pathology. So there's not only this response to a perceived sexual orientation, but there's also this response to a perceived transgression of gender roles. So Black gay men, oftentimes from a very young age, are receiving messages that, there's something wrong with being Black. They're not doing male correctly. So they're not fulfilling the roles of what it means to be a man correctly. And again, this can all be very confusing for a young child. I remember my father used to say, and I teach Piaget's cognitive development theory and stuff. To talk about, it's not really until the formal operational stage that people understand abstract thinking and things like that. But I remember my father saying, take that wig off your head and put some bass in your voice. And I was just like, I don't have a wig on my head. What are you talking about? But now I understand what he was saying was that my voice was too light and I was acting in a way that he perceived not male enough, right? But even though I didn't have the language at that point, and again, this is as far back as 6 years old, I remember, even though I didn't have the language at that point, I knew that something was wrong. I was doing something wrong. So very early on, there's a message that you're doing something wrong. And the something that you're doing wrong is not necessarily a behavior, it's who you are.
Absolutely. Thank you for laying that out. That's very, it's very touching, very emotional for me to actually even hear it. Once they've received these injuries, tell me a little bit about what actually happens when a person receives an injury like the ones you're talking about, emotionally, physically, mentally. What's happening to them as they're sustaining some of the stuff that you're talking about?
Well, there's internalizing and externalizing reactions, right? So for someone receiving these types of injuries, there could definitely be the internalizing of them in the sense that one believes that something's wrong with them and starts to tell themselves there's something wrong with me, And so in a sense, it becomes like on a loop and you don't even need an outside person to affirm these things because you're affirming them for yourself at all times. So you could totally internalize these messages and then turn the harm towards yourself. In the sense that, you could become depressed. There may either be suicidal thoughts, in some cases, suicide attempts. There's also anxiety. There's this hypervigilance around one becomes hyper aware of their self-presentation, right? So how does my voice sound now? Is it deep enough? What are my hands doing? Are my hands moving too much? How am I walking? Am I walking correctly? Are my hips moving? So it becomes a hyper focus on one's physical presentation when you receive messages that we're doing gender wrong. The same thing when we receive a message that to be Black is to be dangerous. And when I'm in spaces that are not predominantly or primarily Black, am I doing things to kind of allay the concerns of those white and non-Black people around me? So again, this hyper focus on bodily presentation, as in addition to those things like anxiety and depression and in some cases suicidal ideation and attempts. Then there's also the externalizing behaviors, right, that one may engage in as a response to this sort of injury, in the sense that one may then begin to act out in those settings, right? One may begin to bully those around them to get the attention off of them. And in some cases, I mean, I don't know how people are raising children today. In 2018, right?
Yes.
So it's different if you're raising a child in 2018. Yeah. I doubt it, because, I mean, not to say there's not some things haven't got better, but based on my conversations with heterosexual Black people raising children currently, a lot of them still hold on to these sort of rigid gender roles and ideas, right? So, but there's this sense that, you know, if I act out and I bully others, then it takes the attention off me. And in some cases, you may be praised for acting out from those primary caregivers, your mother, your father, grandmother, whoever, because that aggression is masculine, right? So now you're being a real boy, right? In these cases, in some ways, it becomes about being hyper masculine. So embodying this sort of toxic masculinity where one denies emotion, right? Because emotion is seen as feminine. And we receive those messages that injured us that says our emotional expression is wrong, right? And so there is the performance of hypermasculinity, and that can look like people really being into sports or taekwondo or things like that. And not to say that there aren't gay, bisexual, same-gender men who are genuinely enjoy those things, but there are some who are only participating in them to prove or to gain the approval of those around them. And so when one grows up like this, we then see it in not only the platonic interpersonal relationships, but also the romantic relationships as well.
Okay. So walk me through how that then turns into narcissism in our adult relationships, all of those injuries. Yeah.
So I think, again, if we're thinking about the externalizing behavior, right, then there's this sense, it can go so far where I'm trying to prove that I'm not all those negative things that you said to me, that I developed this grandiosity. Right? So I become the Black gay man that always has to have the best car, or I have to be super fit, or I have to, you know, be at all the right places and know all the right people. Or I have to become the lawyer or the doctor or the engineer and have the, you know, the best high status career. Right? All of these things in an attempt to portray a sort of grandiosity that one does not actually feel inside. And this also becomes the case in relationships, in the sense that we form those images of ourselves and we start to project them out into the world. And then, though, we attract people who can then feed our egos. They see us in these positive lights that we have crafted, because we need people to see us that way, because we don't feel that way about ourselves. So we get partners who maybe are not at that status that we have crafted for ourselves. And so, in the sense, the person we're in a relationship with is always looking up at us. And so on one hand, while that might make us feel good about ourselves, it can also become fodder for us to then put that person down, which again is not part of a healthy relationship, right? And we can also become preoccupied with attracting the perfect partner. So we have this sense that we have to be perfect, right, in order to combat all those negative messages and injuries that we've experienced. and then we only accept perfection in others, right? And so not only do I have to have the best job, go to the best places and all the right people, my partner has to as well. If my partner doesn't, something's wrong with them, right? And so a lot of times we see relationships not lasting long because of this, because you're looking for perfection in others as well, because you convince yourself that you're perfect, or you're trying to convince yourself that you're perfect. And so it's not conducive to a healthy relationship, because that's unrealistic. It's unrealistic. And so not only are you then putting pressure on yourself, you're putting pressure on the people in your dating pool.
Yeah. And I'm wondering too about abuse in those relationships.
Yeah, we know that IPV is significant in intimate partner violence.
Oh yeah.
IPV is significant in same-sex relationships. I don't know any literature focusing particularly on Black gay men and IPV. Doesn't mean it's not out there. I just haven't read it. But in same-sex relationships, I have read that literature in particular, and we know that it is a significant issue. And so we see the violence. And I'm using that term broadly. So everything from emotional violence to physical violence, right? So we see emotional violence in the sense that in those relationships, the men can then start to monopolize the energy of the relationship. And what I mean by that is that the focus of both partners' energy becomes that one person. So the one person is, here's what I went through today. Here's what here's what I need. Here's what I'm doing. And then the other person, because, they love them or they're dealing with their own issues or whatever it is, then doesn't focus so much on themselves, but then starts to focus on the other, on the narcissistic partner. And all their energy is like, well, he had a bad day, so let me do this. Let me make him his favorite cake because I know he had a bad day. Or, which again there's nothing wrong with that sort of taking care of our partners in and of itself. But when it becomes the only thing that one is thinking about, and it monopolizes the energy of the relationship in a way that all of the energy goes into one person and not both people in a relationship, I conceptualize that as violence. That's emotional.
Absolutely.
That's emotional violence. And so then we see that a monopolization of the energy, right? We can also see it as envy in relationships. So especially if, again, I've internalized all of these ego injuries, and now I am thinking about, I need to be the best in the room. And so if I'm in a relationship with someone else who may have their own ego injuries and they need to be the best in the room, or maybe it's not even about them being the best in the room, maybe they're just trying to live what they understand to be their purpose, right? But that then becomes a threat to the person with narcissism. It becomes a threat to him. And so then he may try to sabotage his partner's growth and achievement, or he may support his partner's achievement, but then it is passive aggressive about it. It's passive aggressive. Maybe you want to slow down. Maybe you don't need to try to save the world. Just do this, just do that. And try to. And it may seem completely benevolent, and so that the partner doesn't even realize what's going on. It may seem like, oh, he's trying to take care of me, but he may actually be more nefarious, have more nefarious intentions, because his ego is being threatened in this sense. And of course, we see it in taking advantage of partners. whether that's financially or whether that's emotionally or whether that's with networking. You know, again, if I have this sense that I have to be the best, I need to know the right people. Maybe I'm with you because your circle's good. You know, your circle is the circle I want to be in. So maybe now I'm getting with you so that I can now, you know, get my hands into that circle. So it can manifest in a lot of different ways, all the way up to, you know, what we may consider more extreme forms of violence, like physical violence or sexual violence. And I think those things are likely to happen when the normal modes of operation seem to be failing. In the sense that maybe I'm trying to manipulate you emotionally and it was working, but now it's no longer working. And so now I'm going to use physical or sexual aggression in order to maintain my higher status in this relationship. And sometimes, you know, it could be more passive. I hesitate to use the word passive, but it may not be conceptualized by the person doing it as necessarily malevolent or necessarily a negative thing. It may be more so like, well, you're my partner and this is what I want, so you should do this, right? For example, I'm thinking in the sexual domain. Sometimes, you know, we talk about sexual abuse and it's not always, I'm holding you down, I'm beating you up, abusing you, but it may be like, you know, I want you to do this sexual act and you should do it because you're my, you know, and whatever manipulative rationale is given, right? But that is sexual abuse as well. Yeah.
So it's almost like there's an added layer of the narcissism that is very culturally specific.
Yes.
And I'm glad that you're here to talk about it. One of the things that I'm curious about, you talked a lot about being injured while growing up, and some of that coming from parents, family. Is it possible to repair those injuries?
And this is when I would consult you. And I would say, Nancy girl, tell me what I need to do with these things, right? So what I will say though, so of course, again, I am very upfront about this. This is my area of expertise. I think what my area of expertise is are exactly those cultural dimensions of this disorder that you just spoke about, right? So what I would do is I would go to an expert like you to ask about what's evidence-based practices for treating this disorder, but I would be integrating theories like minority stress theory, like intersectionality theory, like Black psychological concepts into the work in order to get at those culturally specific dimensions of the white supremacy injury, of the gender role injury, of the sexual orientation injury, and using those to get at the particular ways in which the very unique context of my client, the narcissism is being displayed in the very particular context that my client finds themselves in. Yeah.
What about for the men who are being victimized? Where can they go to get treatment that's specifically going to address their concerns?
Well, I think this is an issue with the field, right? And you and I have had this conversation offline, and you know, other scholars of color have written about this. But particularly when we look at African Americans or Black people in America, we make up 2% or less of the psychologists in America, and Black same-gender loving men like myself, maybe 0.08%. Right. So, not to say that people who are not Black, or people who are not Black-centered loving folks can't do work that can help those men. But I'm skeptical.
Yeah.
I'm skeptical. I have not heard a lot of people talk about these things. I have not read people's work who are writing about these things.
Yeah.
Specifically for this particular population that we're discussing today. So I may do it afterwards now. Maybe joint project, right? You be the narcissism expert, I'll be the cultural expert, right? Okay, I'll talk to you offline. But so all this to say, they may find it hard to find someone who can really deal with these in this culturally specific way. But that does not mean that more general narcissistic treatment can't also be beneficial.
Applied, yeah.
But I think for the men who are victims, I think the first step is awareness. And not only awareness, but awareness and courage. Because it's like any abusive relationship, right? Like, people are aware that they're being abused most times, but it's really hard to extricate oneself from that abusive situation most times. And as, you know, mental health professionals, we expect people to go back into those relationships several times even, you know. I forget the exact number, but we know that people usually go back more than once.
Absolutely.
So I think, you know, what I would say to the person who may be in a relationship with a narcissistic person, a Black gay man who may be in a relationship with a narcissistic partner, I would say, one, look for those signs that we've been discussing. Two, if it sounds like your partner, you know, if you feel empowered enough, I mean, because there may be like financial constraints, maybe this is their only source of, you know, housing, so on and so forth. So it may be, what's the word I'm looking for? It may be detrimental to bring this up, especially if safety is the issue. Then I would recommend that you not bring this up directly to them. But if you feel like this is something you could bring up with your partner, I would at least bring it up. Now, I would, if the person is truly narcissistic, I would not think it would end up doing a lot of good in changing their behavior. However, it will, I think it could be particularly powerful for the person experiencing the relationship with a narcissistic partner to bring it up, just so that they get an experience of themselves of acting on their behalf in a loving way, on their own behalf in a loving way. But also finding outside support. So whether that's friends, family, some support of others, whether that's a spirituality, maybe spirituality is very important to you, some sort of supportive resources that can help one get that courage to leave and stay gone. Yeah.
And as you're talking, you know, just to kind of simplify it for my listeners, our listeners, I would say that the person who is narcissistic in the relationship also is the externalizer, whereas the victim is the internalizer.
Exactly. Totally.
And culturally, just knowing what I know about working with Black men in general, gay Black men, straight Black men, but Black men in general, they're not likely to go to treatment.
No.
What do you say? Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, though, and I think, and again, this is a broader conversation, but we do know that sexual minority men are more likely to go to healthcare providers than heterosexual Black men. They're more likely to have routine care, and they're more likely to receive sexual health services. So I think that is a domain in which we can start to intervene and do frontline prevention and treatment in those settings. So having screenings about relationships. So when you go and see someone for condoms or you get tested for STIs or HIV, having a screening in the waiting room about intimate partner violence or narcissism in the relationship and things like that, and then refer those folks, or have mental health care providers on site to talk about them, because maybe, you know, people start therapy, and we know most people who start therapy in after the first 1 or 2 sessions for whatever reason. But I believe having that initial contact can be very beneficial, even if it's just 1 session, because it gets the person to thinking.
It does. And I'm glad that you said that. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what victims should be looking for at these screenings. Like, okay, what makes me, what should I be thinking about in terms of whether or not I'm being victimized? And I know you mentioned the sexual stuff. Is there something else in which you think a Black gay man can be asking himself this, you know, just if they're listening to this show, saying, well, maybe there is something that I need to look at in myself, because maybe I am being victimized, or maybe I am being abused outside of the sexual stuff?
I would say one of the fundamental questions that a person who is thinking that they may be the victim, or I should say the internalized partner, as you said, in a narcissistic relationship, is, what is the flow of energy in the relationship? Do I find that the energy is always going into my partner? Does my partner's needs always come first? Am I performing sexually primarily for his pleasure? Is it reciprocated? Or do our outings, are there things that he likes to do? How often do we do things that I like to do? Am I isolated? Are we mostly with his friend group? You know, or if maybe we're with my friends, but is he still center stage? You know, so asking questions about what is the flow of energy in the relationship across several different domains, and you will start to understand I might be in a relationship with a narcissistic person.
So then what do you say also to the man, Black gay man, who may be listening to this and has a hard time because of all of those messages that you described, has a hard time saying, well, I'm a man, how can I identify with being a victim? I'm not a victim, I'm a man.
Right.
You know what does that make sense?
Right. And I do kind of shy away from the language of victim, just for my own personal, I don't believe it's because man, but just because it can be disempowering.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
So I do kind of shy away from that term, but I would say if you do think you're in a relationship with a narcissistic person, it's not so much about being the victim, but just really about what you deserve. Do you feel that you're getting what you deserve? And for some people, again, depending on the depth of that injury that we were talking about earlier, they may believe this is what they deserve, right? And for those people, it's going to take several experiences for them to finally come to a place to believe that they deserve more. And for some of those men, they may never get there. And those are just the facts. And so what I will say, though, is, are you getting what you deserve? Are you getting what you deserve? Are you being valued in the relationship? It's not so much about being a victim, but are you being valued? Are you getting what you deserve out of your relationship? And if the answer is no, then why not? Is it because maybe we're not getting what we deserve because we're not putting in enough? That's another story. That's another conversation. But maybe it's because the energy is all flowing into this one person.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The energy, the work that you described. And so you talked in the beginning about how family and society has these views of the Black gay man that lead to these injuries. So with that being said, there's a lot more awareness in society about what's going on. I wouldn't say we're 100% by any stretch of the means, but let's say, we know someone, we have a Black gay friend, male friend, that's going through this stuff in their relationship. We're concerned about him. Maybe he's our friend, maybe he's our brother. How can we then, especially if it's a situation where we're not 100% understanding of the lifestyle or accepting of the lifestyle, which a lot of people in this community are still very much feel that way. Right or wrong is still the way they feel.
Yes.
How can we then support the person whom we care about, who is going through this?
Right. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. What my default is to love them. Sometimes we have to love people when they're not able to love themselves. And so if a person is in a relationship with a narcissistic person, and they're not recognizing their worth and they're not getting their needs met in that relationship, they're there for whatever reason, but they will not, until they develop that courage to act, that awareness and that courage to act, they're not going to act. Or they're not going to act in any consistent way to remove themselves from that situation. And so I think we need to love them until they're able to do it consistently for themselves. And let me be a little bit more concrete. So what I mean is not necessarily shaming them or saying, you need, because you know how some of our family, like, he don't do what? You always do this? What? Why you with him? Like, that's not helpful. You laughing because that's the way folks in our community are, right? But that's not helpful. But what can be helpful is listening. When they come to you, listen. And just affirm how great they are. And not in a superficial, oh, you're so great, but give them concrete things. If your Black gay male friend is coming to you and saying, every time we go out, we have to go to where he goes. And I always go. We may affirm them and say something like, you really care about him. You really care about people. That's a really good quality that you have. Right? So letting them recognize that we see the good qualities of them, and it's not wrong that they have these qualities. Yeah. But it's because we don't want to pathologize caring about others. But what we do want to say is that the same way that you do these things for him and your partner or your dates, you deserve to have someone do that for you too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The other question I did want to ask is,
I'm sorry. And tell them, when they're ready, go to there.
Of course. The other question I wanted to ask is, what should a person do if the injuring never stops?
Oh.
And I don't mean just in their relationships, but I mean in some of the stuff that we've talked about in terms of the culture, society, just being gay, being accepted as being gay or being Black, and how can that be dealt with?
Yeah, I made that audible gasp because that hit me. That hit me hard because it actually never does stop.
Yeah.
I am a Black stranger loving man with a PhD, a pretty good job. I make more money than anyone in the history of my family that I know about, right? So, which still ain't enough, but
yes,
but I do, right? But all those things to say, it does not protect you. It does not protect you. It does not keep you safe. You're still subjected to the homonegativity, both interpersonally and structurally on the societal level, the political level. Gender identity, transgender, that's a different thing from being gay. But I see all of those causes interconnected, right? If we can take away the rights of one group, it's only a matter of time before our rights are threatened, right? So that has an effect on folks, right? And we definitely know that anti-Blackness is alive and well.
Oh, yeah.
And I say anti-Blackness in particular and not racism because, again, we're talking about Black people here. And I think that racism, anyone, any person of color can be a victim of racism. But anti-Blackness affects particularly Black people, but it's not only perpetuated by white Americans, it's also perpetuated by other people of color.
And our own people.
And our own people. Oh, yeah, internalized anti-Blackness is real.
Yes.
Real. It is real, Clarence Thomas, right? And so many others, right? Ben Carson. Oh, that hurt me. We're not into Ben Carson. He was my hero as a child. Anyway, but but it's real, and you're right. It does not stop. It's in every single level of this society. Derek Bell, who created critical race theory, talks about how racism is mundane and anti-Blackness is mundane, right? So back to your question, though, how does one heal when the injury is ongoing? And here's what I say, is that the way that I think about health and the way that I talk to my patients about this and the way I conceptualize it when I'm doing my research studies, it is not so much the absence of hurt or injury or disease. It's not so much the absence of those things, but the ability to live a healthy life in spite of, ability to live a fulfilling life in spite of those things. And so, yes, those structural things, I'm not optimistic that they're ever going to go away. Maybe they will. I'm not holding my breath, right? But that does not mean that I am not committed to helping people learn how to adapt in these anti-Black, homonegative, transphobic spaces, so that they can live lives that are fulfilling nonetheless. So I think I guess my answer to your question is, I do not believe it is a necessity for those things to go away before people can heal. I believe that people can heal even in the midst of those things. And the way that we do that are by, one, becoming aware, learning to love ourselves, exactly what that looks like, and connecting with our community. This goes back to Black psychology. Black psychology is all about, it says I am because we are. And so healing cannot take place in isolation. We have to, if we have a community of one, as long as that is a supportive person, that's very important. And so healing can take place in that community of that one person. And then it's also our responsibility. It can be healing to help others heal. So it may not be in the sense that they're dealing with the same exact issues that we're dealing with, but we all have our own stuff. So I can learn how to be more myself and to center myself more by helping others, because that's going to give me a sense of pride. It's going to give me a sense of self-worth. It's going to give me a sense of value to know that I'm helping someone who's also bi-directionally helping me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as you were talking, because we're almost out of time, believe it or not. It does. And maybe you know the answer to this question and maybe not. For the men who are being abused, and it is a safety concern, is there some place they can go to get support if there's some safety concerns, or that they can go to get out that you would recommend?
Yeah. This also hits me too, because again, I'm not saying they're out there, but I do not know of them because a lot of the times where women end up are shelters.
Yes.
That shelters are not as accepting of men as they are.
Absolutely.
And so that's a societal issue that contributes to the sort of abuse and make it harder to escape when you are having it. I think a lot of times what ends up happening is that police get involved. But for Black men, that's also can end very negatively. It can end very negatively and can end up putting the person who's experiencing the narcissistic partner in more danger than they were before. So I do not know of any places that particularly cater to this issue.
Yeah.
So I don't know. If I'm working with a client, I'm going to tell them to think about who's in their support network that they can go to, and maybe because you said before, there are sometimes we may have people in our network who are supportive of us, but they may not get our sexual orientation. So in those instances, when you find yourself and you may just need to get out, I would highlight my safety and not so much my sexual orientation. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying be closeted. I'm not saying lie. What I am saying, though, is where to place the emphasis.
Exactly. Yeah. Survive by any means necessary.
Exactly.
Yeah. What can society do to support, rebuild, or help the Black gay men be resilient?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you think? I mean, I know that's like a broad question, but if you could name, one or two things that you think we as a society need to really start thinking about.
Right. So, you say it's a society, and again, I'm a Black psychologist, so my center is always Black people. So when I hear society, I think Black.
Okay. So, fair.
That's who I'm thinking about. That's my default. But again, no shade to other communities.
Yeah.
But I think white supremacy, homonegativity, transphobia, patriarchy, they're all intertwined. I think a lot of what we see as patriarchy and homonegativity or transphobia in Black communities stems from Black people's struggle to see themselves outside of a white gaze, in the sense that there's this sense been passed down to us because our sexualities, heterosexual, bisexual, gay, so on and so forth, have been pathologized just because we're Black, that then Black people then turn around and pathologize other folks in an effort to, one, originally it was protected, right? You're trying to protect your offspring. But two, also to make themselves feel better.
Absolutely.
In a world that tells them that, they're less than, they're inferior because they're Black. So I think we need to address white supremacy. And again, not necessarily racism, but white supremacy, meaning how are we internalizing white values, white ways of being, white ways of speaking, white ways of talking, white careers, all of these things, how are we valuing that over ourselves and over our people? And because that is connected to the homophobia. And I think we need to make much more of an emphasis on educating Black people around issues of sexuality and gender identity. Because, when I came out, my mom and I were great now, but when I came out, she's like, oh, so does this mean you want to be a woman? And I'm like, no, I'm very comfortable being a man. I like being a man. I like all my parts. And I just like other men. But oftentimes those things get conflated.
Yeah.
And so, but I also think some of that work is on Black same gender loving men.
Okay.
To do that work with our families. Sometimes some families are going to be more receptive than others. But one thing that I learned in a relationship once was that someone said, you educate people. One of the most powerful ways to educate people around these issues is to just be who you are. And so by being who I am, I think my family has learned a lot about LGBT issues just because I'm living my truth, and I'm doing so in a way with integrity, and I'm doing so in a way that I'm still a good person.
Yeah.
You know, I'm still a loving person. I'm still helping others. And so I think that goes a long way as well.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Any resources that you have, for men who are having the experiences that you speak of, that are struggling, need support, want to reach out to someone, or just want to learn more about what's going on with them?
Yeah, so I don't have them in front of me, but I did email you some. So those, but as I said, I think a lot of the healing starts with awareness and understanding. So one of the books, I don't know if you can see this.
Yes.
The Spirit of Intimacy. This talks about relationships. Some of it's aimed at heterosexual audiences, but there's this chapter in here about people of same-sex attraction, but it integrates Afrocentric principles. I think that's a good text to just start thinking about what a healthy relationship might look like for a same-gender loving man in particular. This book has been really helpful lifting the spiritual self-esteem. A lot of Black men are raised in religious environments, and our spirituality has been used as the weapon. And so this can also help because this goes back to that self-love and start healing some of those injuries that we talked about. Just really trying to find ways to affirm ourselves in any type of media. I mean, one of the great things about the world we live in today is that we have Google, we have YouTube, we can find things that can affirm us, that can help us learn more about different things. When I came up, it was pretty much books. And that's it. But I still love books, right? And so like reading fiction about Black gay men, it is people who are in healthy relationships can also be very helpful.
Absolutely. And I have a question for you. Who's your hero?
I have several. It depends on the day. Today is you.
I love you for that.
But we have our love fest, when we're talking to each other. But you are one of my heroes. Just to be a Black woman psychologist, doing your thing, just so freaking genuine. I'm always checking in, like, am I being authentic? Am I being genuine? And then I'm thinking about what would Natalie do? Like, am I biting my tongue too much? Natalie would probably say something. You're one of my heroes.
Oh, you are so sweet. I love you for that. How can people connect with you if they're like as blown away by this interview as I am, and they said, I just have to get in touch with Dr. Lassiter? How can they reach you?
My website, www.jonathan, JONATHANM, Lassiter, LASSITER.com. JonathanMLassiter.com. And I'm sure in the video you'll have.
I will definitely have the show notes and put all that up there. Yep.
And on Twitter @Matt MATJL, and on Instagram @JMLassiter PhD.
Oh. I love it. And any projects, any conferences, anything that you got coming out or going on that we can support you with?
So I am doing a research study right now particularly looking at Black, gay, bisexual, same gender loving men's, and men broadly defined. So mean either you were born as male and you still identify as male, or you were born assigned female at birth, but now you currently identify as male.
Okay.
But looking at those men's experiences of stress and spirituality. And you can find out more about that study on my website, but it's called the Spirituality and Stress Study. And so I'm doing that now. So
are you recruiting participants?
I'm recruiting.
Okay, that's good to point out. So anybody who's listening who knows of someone can go to your website.
And there's an incentive. You get $15 for completing the survey, and there's a possibility to be randomly assigned to the randomly selected for the face-to-face interview, and that's $30. So there's an opportunity to make up to $45 by participating.
Okay.
But the other thing, I don't really have any public speaking appearances coming up this year. There will be something at the 92Y next April in New York City, but that's a ways off.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, John, for coming on the show. Dr. Lassiter, for coming on the show. I appreciate you, and I know everybody else will too.
Well, I'm just trying to be of service and use all those many years I went to school to help people, especially our people.
Exactly. And I love you for doing that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.